Hello and welcome back to another Dev Diary. Today we've got lots of things to talk about, so we're going to have to jump straight into two bits of news before we can even talk about the Bulgarian Dev Diary and focus tree. The first bit of news is this tweet from Paradox in response to asking whether there will be a Turkish focus tree and stuff to do with Turkey. The long and short of what we can assume is there probably is going to be a Turkish focus tree. It's probably going to happen this DLC. It's probably going to be announced next week. So if you're looking forward to it, and if you're wondering, there it is. And of course I'll be covering it on this channel, so if you want to see a Turkish Dev Diary, you can subscribe. The second bit of news is something I missed last week on the Greeks Dev Diary, where in one event, seen here on the Bosporus Gamble, there was an event ID for BFTB Greece 31. Now that initial acronym at the start is most likely going to be the acronym for the DLC, which some people in my comments section have pretty much divulged is likely to mean Battle for the Bosporus. That is probably the most likely title for the upcoming DLC, seconded potentially by Battle for the Balkans. Regardless of what it is, I'm almost certain that that is the acronym for the DLC. Let's go into the Bulgarian Dev Diary because there is a lot to cover. Okay, so Bulgaria in 1936 is not in the best place in the world. They've had a coup d'etat which has overthrown multiple governments. They've got underground insurgents in the form of Macedonians. We've got one coup that turned into a Tsardom. Generally speaking, things aren't very good. And this is represented through their starting national spirits. So playing as Bulgaria, you'll start off with the second national catastrophe, which effectively gives you weekly stability of -0.3 among other debuffs. This is terrible and will completely stab you in the back. What is interesting though is this new idea that the focus will be removed if you have these states. I've not seen this mechanic implemented anywhere else in the game, so yeah, I really like that. The second national spirit is army restrictions, which gives you -25% on factory output and dockyard output, but far more debilitating. You can't increase conscription laws, you can't declare wars, you can't train units. It's basically like Spain all over again. Bulgaria is completely neutered. This is all part of the treaties that Bulgaria was given after World War I and their loss. The final national spirit is IMRO, which gives you a daily political gain of -0.3. Again, pretty debilitating. This is to represent the underground Bulgarian Macedonians, which are currently in hiding in the country, tearing away at your power base. The only positives you have is Boris, your leader, is the Tsar and is giving you some pretty good daily unaligned support which keeps you pushed up, and his puppet Prime Minister, Georgi, which also gives you weekly stability 0.3+, which effectively means it cancels out the previous debuff you got from the second national committee. So you aren't losing weekly stability, but if you lose the Prime Minister, you've kind of sold yourself down the water. So with Bulgaria in a pretty dire position all the way around, let's take a look at the focus tree and see what we can do. The industrial tree takes two key paths, focusing on foreign investment or just boosting your own internal development. Going for the foreign capitals effectively means you'll get very decent upgrades early, including your designer companies, but they won't stack very well into the late game. Meanwhile, if you go for your invigorate the national industry, you'll have a very weak early game, but as you complete more focuses over time, you will eventually have an even more powerful base than if you went with the foreign companies. It's a either decent early game or weak early game, but then strong late game. What is, however, a very interesting focus you spot at the bottom is uranium prospecting, which gives you 2 research bonuses for nuclear technology, some decent national spirit to increase your ability to create nukes, and a decision that unlocks which allows you to trade those resources for consumer good buffs. I think this is a great idea for a focus, particularly the decision, which makes it so that it's not just Bulgaria randomly becoming a nuclear power, but getting the technology so they can help another country become a nuclear power. I do worry though that the integration of nukes into the game is so late game and kind of not really touched about that I'm not sure if this will have too much leverage, but it's still a pretty cool idea, and it's a 2 times 200% research bonus, so maybe nukes won't be so late game after all. Next up we have the military path, which first off serves to try and get rid of that terrible national debuff where you can't change wars or template divisions or conscription laws. It's all quite terrible. So in order to do that, you're going to have to negotiate the Bulgarian rearmament. In this, you can either have 2 decisions. Want to demonstrate your policies of peace and try and negotiate the army restrictions to go away, proving that you're not a threat to the region, or going to war against the United Kingdom, or at least not in their faction, and then completely refusing the army restrictions, as seen by the tooltip here. Note that you will have to do this if you want to declare a war, so it may be worth considering getting this early or going for your industry, because you won't be doing any wars until it's over. Moving even further down, there's an even stranger national focus called the Prussia of the Balkans, which gives you an absolutely ridiculous amount of buffs. I mean, just look at this. There's so much here. Of course, it would be argued that it'll take you quite a while to get here, but look at it all. There's even a justify war goal time of -50. In terms of the naval tree, it's pretty much what you might expect, some standard focuses, research bonuses and all the rest. However, if you do complete the naval tree and the army tree, you'll get the ability to unlock these 4 focuses down here, the dominance in the surrounding seas of the Bulgarian region. I'm not quite sure what these focuses do because the dev diary doesn't tell us, but one can assume that they involve getting war goals on conquering the surrounding region. But if focusing on the army and industry isn't your key goal, then don't worry, because there's a pretty decent political tree to go with it. This really does remind me of the sort of Mexico political tree we had before, and I'm going to say I really liked the Mexico political tree, so you're going to say I like this one too. The tree is divided into 2 parts. If you choose to oppose the Tsar, you can go down the position of communism and democracy, or if you side with the Tsar, you have the roots of monarchism and fascism. In this, we see a very similar mechanic to the previous one we saw with Greece, that being the return of faction. Again, there seem to be 4 internal factions in your country, although they aren't necessarily politically aligned, but agenda aligned as well, including those who want to see sort of agrarian unions and the standard socialists, but not necessarily communists. And again, similar to how it worked with Greece, whether you choose to get rid of these factions can give you minor buffs, or working with these factions can get you even greater buffs, including unlocking political advisors for that particular faction. Here we can see a guy called Nikolai, who gives you political power gain, max factories and states, resources to market, and some rather inconvenient democracy support, unless you were going democracy. Speaking of internalised plots, you also have that Macedonian-Bulgarian issue we were talking about earlier. In this, you can either choose to condemn them or support them. Condemning them will of course get you much greater support from the allies and your neighbours, who don't particularly want a group of terrorists in the region, although if you go for the other version, you may be able to integrate them into more a part of your country and get the useful state modifiers that come with them. Here we can see one of those modifiers which gives you more factories, resistance, more resources and compliance growth. Okay, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but let's go through the ideologies. Starting with communism. So to start off, you would get rid of the Tsar, and if your stability is low, you'll have a sad civil war. But assuming you've bypassed the potential civil war, you'll go down a pretty standard communist focus tree. The key point of this would be to get as far down to the People's Republic of Bulgaria as quickly as possible, so that you can have a strong, solidified communist front to do the things you want to do. Once you have a good communist hold in Bulgaria, there's the obvious doctrinal split at the bottom, which is the so common thread of either join the Stalinists or form your own miniature communist union. It does have to lose points for originality here. I do feel like this is the exact same formula we see with every focus tree. You either join Stalin or you form your own communist bloc. This is the only 2 outcomes of communism in this game. That does not, however, mean that the independent path, the non-Stalinist communist path, isn't interesting, because in this we have something called the unification of the Balkans. And this isn't just a big formable nation where you conquer everyone then click a button. It's actually more of a democratic process in which you have to integrate these countries through internalised communist wars. It seems like quite an interesting concept, and I quite like it overall. I think once all is said and done, your eyes will feast upon the United Balkan Federation. Look, I'm going to say it because we're all thinking it. That is the most disgusting colour you could have possibly picked for this federation. It looks awful. The idea is incredible. The colour palette is awful. It doesn't help that every single country surrounding it is also quite light as well. But now that RGB abomination has been removed, we can move on to the democratic path. So the democratic path seems to be quite interesting as well, which is a harsh shift from how democratic paths have been in the past. I think Paradox is trying to make it so that democracy isn't just the waiting for other countries to have fun route. In this, you can choose whether you want to work with the Tsar or completely abandon him for the Agrarian Union. If you choose to work with Greece and work towards a Balkan Confederation, you will have the option to bury the grudges of the past, the same as the socialist, and work towards the unification of the Balkans all over again. So two ideologies both have access to the same tree, except the Confederation of the Balkans can have two different paths. The communist path seems to involve war, while the democratic path, as seen here, seems to involve industrial investment, capital injection, and potentially full integration. It's almost like its own miniaturized European Union of the Balkans. You know, if our industries are connected, our countries can be too. All in all, I think this is a great idea. I love the idea that there's a separate way to do this, and the fact that they use the same tree with different outcomes is also a really cool idea. On the other side, if you prefer not to integrate yourself into the rest of the Balkans and stand on your own lands, you can consolidate the third Bulgarian state, which can push down to the free Balkan states. The Free Balkan States is again a rather unique national spirit which we haven't seen before, in which you get a consumer goods factory and a stability boost for each country you've guaranteed. Now every time you guarantee a country, the cost of guaranteeing another country goes up by 25 pp. So I'm not sure how good this ability is actually going to stack unless you have the option to get free guarantees over things. Let's say you wanted to guarantee 5 countries. That would cost you 375 political power. I really wonder if that's going to be worth in the end. But it does also say you gain a puppet war goal as well, so maybe there will be some war in here, although it doesn't tell you who it's going to be against. However, on the other side of the tree, we move to the monarchist and fascist branches. The first route of this path is to tell us to go as quickly as possible down to Bulgarian irredentism, which is to counter that initial second national catastrophe spirit with Bulgarian irredentism. This converts the weekly stability loss into a weekly war support gain, as well as some good buffs on the side. There seems to be quite a lot of overlap with this tree, whereas if you choose to go down the hard right wing, you'll have to work with Germany and Italy, while going down the Tsar's path allows you to work with the Allies. But other than that, you can seem to cross, switch, swap with the focuses as and when you need. One of the paths you might be sent down, if you go down either the democratic or the monarchist path, is plot against Boris. In this you'll have to pick between a new monarch. You have the hardened officer Hristo here, Mr. Lukov. You can elect a regency council because the next heir is a small child, or perhaps you can go with the more traditional previous Tsar of Ferdinand I, who returns with a dream of a new Byzantium. And yes, I think it's pretty hard to just gloss over this fact. A new Byzantium, Ferdinand I. I didn't quite expect Bulgaria to be the new nation to form Byzantium with in 1936, but it seems that this character is exactly about that. He also has some interesting abilities with his character, in that he gives a master impact of -0.1, so it would seem that perhaps half of his tree is about puppeting countries and then integrating them naturally using the autonomy system. Okay, warning, we're going to start talking about historical focus tree paths now, so this is a very rare thing for a focus tree, a historical path, so just brace yourself. So you can, as Bulgaria, join the Tripartite Pact and decide whether you want to join Germany in all-out war with the total war focus, or go for a more peaceful method in which you just help them secure their territories in the Balkan regions. This is solidified by you previously having asked for the territories of the previous Bulgarian Empire. Once you do this, you then begin your Bulgarianization campaign to make sure that all the territories that Italy and Germany have conquered for you come under your control. You're effectively the leech of the Axis, aren't you? just sort of sucking up their victories for your own gains, despite the fact you're not actually in a war. Once you reach the bottom, you can quickly decide between restoring the Bulgarian Patriarch, which is the method in which you'd want to gain good integration bonuses so that all the territory you've asked for truly comes under your control, or you've got the more boisterous Third Bulgarian Empire, in which you basically completely dominate the region and get a new tag to match. The last part of the tree to cover is the fate of the Balkans, which is accessible through not just the monarchist and the fascist path, but also through the democratic path if you manage to do a hard swipe to the right all the way down to the fate of the Balkans. This gives you the ability to do some subjugations and ultimatums to countries in the region, demanding that they come under your control or face the consequences of war. It is interesting that this comes under a democratic path, because it seems to be quite the authoritarian path that we'd expect from World War II. It seems that the fate of the Balkans is effectively you becoming your own Napoleon and taking on the entire world by yourself, and having the option to go down to the previous two Bulgarian Patriarch and the Bulgarian Empire focuses. And that covers most of the chaos that is the Bulgarian focus tree. All in all, there's so much crossover going on that it seems that you can go from monarchist to fascist, or from democratic to fascist, or maybe communist to democratic. Many of the trees converge on each other, but have different paths they follow depending on your previous choices. This isn't a criticism, by the way. This is a good thing, because it at least creates a more dynamic flow to the way you're taking things. I often feel like in previous focus trees, the games become so samey, because once you've decided your ideology, the path is sort of laid out like a train track in front of you. At least this time, if you choose to, let's say, play democratic, there's so much choice within there. There's so many different ways you could do it. There are factions you could join, there are different methods of focuses you could go down, you could make alliances, make guarantees, or just conquer the entire region and secure it that way. I've got to say, this perhaps is the best focus I've seen from this region. It's definitely better than the Greece one in my opinion. Okay, and that covers everything. I'm sorry I couldn't be more concise about covering Bulgaria. Assuming I'm right and next week is Turkey, we will be covering that too. And hopefully a lot better than this one, because this one is insanely messy. Until then, if you enjoyed, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.